Okay, so Audrey here with Polishing Marbles. I wanted to speak to today is about the interesting experience we have as individuals when going through an awakening of actually having to face the idea that all the information we've gotten before now is wrong. Because when there's, by definition, when you're awakening from a period of being asleep. And when you're asleep, things are foggy. When you wake up in the morning, you don't really remember, like, what was that dream I had? I think I was in a grocery store, but it was also my junior high. And somehow, like, it was when I was also working at Wendy's. Like, how did that all be one thing? Yeah. And then there was like 3 feet of water I was having to wade through at the same time. Like, that's a dream. It's absurd. It feels almost impossible to describe it to somebody. It was very real at the time. But then people look at you like you're kind of, what are you talking about? And that's what it feels like when you wake up from a period of not being awake, which is an illusion. You realize that everything around you in that dream was absurd. But everyone around you is still dreaming. And that's not a judgment on people who are still dreaming. Clearly, I have been dreaming this entire time, too. So, of course, you're dreaming. Everybody is dreaming. But to wake up from that and look at it and be like, oh, that was happening. That does feel absurd. Okay, now I see that at the time when I was in the parking garage that also had a bubble machine in it, that I was having to swim through colorful bubbles. And I was also working my job at the Piper Pub and Grill. For some reason, that is absurd, but in the dream it felt like this was a real problem and I needed to get from here to here. Why weren't the appetizers coming up? And, so that's what it's like to go from that sleep state into a state where you're now recognizing that things are very different than you thought. The problem is that there's so much media that exists, at least in the movies that came out between 1998, 99 to 2000 were all in anticipation of some event happening that was apocalyptic. So that's kind of like when apocalypse movies became a big deal. I was totally into them because I was raised Pentecostal, and so that was like a comfort zone for me. So I really loved the movie, what was it? Devil's Advocate with Keanu Reeves and Robin Tooney and wait, no, not Robin Tooney. I'm making things up. Charlize Theron, and then The End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Robin Tooney. That's what it was. There were just so many apocalyptic movies, and it was all really about things were just all shutting down. And so this whole Y2K period, where I know that my mom had saved up barrels of water in the barn and seeds to restart society, and we had so many things that she had saved up, and I thought it was wackadoo at the time. And they lasted for a long time. When we cleared out the estate, they were still some were still able to be used, and we donated them. But there was this looming feeling, and in those movies there was always some person depicted as a mad, insane person, on a box in some kind of central location, screaming with a cardboard sign that says "The end is near," and everybody disposes of that person as being insane. And even though I wasn't screaming "The end is near," I kind of felt like I was that now. Okay, so now I can see some distortions that exist, very much like the Matrix, taking this pill and then you wake up and you're like, I can't unknow this stuff now. And you see all the people around you that are not in that state, while also physically going through a tremendous amount of change, spiritual knowledge, communication with other realms. And you're like, oh God, I am actually a meme right now of what crazy looks like. If people knew what was going on inside my head, they would have me committed. And so going through that, when you actually just really love the people around you, like love the people around you, and the distortions that are coming up that you're seeing about the way things work, I think that I could see that when I was younger. I could really see that before getting involved in so many systems that provide you with really programming or indoctrination of some kind of like, okay, when you go to school, you sit in this place and you have to do these things and you don't speak unless spoken to, and there's just like rules. There's rules everywhere, and society has rules, and you follow a certain speed when you drive theoretically, and you pay your taxes and you do all these things and you're going to be fine. But I started seeing there was some, like, wait a minute, I have a question. And so when that started happening, it's a very isolating time when you're starting to come to those states of awareness. And so you really don't know who can I talk to without somebody feeling like there's something very wrong. Now to be clear, I have been on the outskirts of woo for my ever. For my ever. I think probably, I don't know, since my first tarot deck in the 90s, I've been interested in things that were more outside of the box. And so that in itself was not strange. Everybody that knows me knows that. Like even friends of mine that were in like friend groups that I had as a younger adult, they would just refer to me as like the hockey hoo-ha stuff or the woo-woo shit, or they would just refer to those things in a not really a disposable way, but kind of making fun. But maybe I just needed to pick up on that more. That Audrey's doing her Audrey thing or whatever. But then they'd want to come to me for tarot readings, and that's fine. But there were people knew that about me, but they didn't know to what degree, I guess. And that was even before the awakening. And so once that happened, I didn't know who I could talk to. Even people I'd known for 20 some years, I was like, I don't know. I think I may be going through a spiritual thing. Like I'd skirt around and see what I could really say that would be well received. And, my daughter probably was the closest just physically adjacent to me, because most of my close friends lived out of town. And so she was seeing that I was not watching television anymore. She was seeing that I was going on a lot of walks. I was journaling a lot. I was listening to certain music. I was starting to buy a lot of different books. She had questions, of like, what are you doing? Why are you looking at weird geometry? And why do we have books on Hebrew now? Like she was curious about that sort of stuff, which is reasonable. But then I would kind of throw it all into a box of I'm just going through a thing, or I would talk about it in terms of like my parents were going through this hard time. I was dealing with their estate, and that's had an effect on me. And I was losing all this weight, and like my patients were actually very worried about me because I'd been seeing some of them for years, and we're, you can't be a practitioner and be with people for years and they don't care about you and you don't care about them. Like it's a close-knit relationship, especially with the topics you're dealing with. And so they would come in after like a 2-week vacation and be like, are you okay? You look like you've lost some weight. Are you okay? And it wasn't like I was becoming gaunt or something. They just noticed that there was a change. And I was like, I'm fine, I think. And they would email me afterward. Are you like, do you need a therapist? And I didn't really need a therapist at the time. I needed someone to talk to, I think. And so I was reaching out to a couple of people I knew were wooey enough, but a lot of people didn't know really what Kundalini was once I figured out what was happening to me. And I also felt a little embarrassed about it because I didn't have a scope and I liked knowing things. I like knowing answers to stuff, and I didn't have any. And if people asked me questions, I didn't even know how to answer that. I didn't even have language to explain what was happening. Like, my sacral chakra is all lit up. I'm not sleeping well. I feel like my spine is actually like turning into like a snake. I could hear it cracking as I was moving in the middle of the night. I was like kind of slithering in my sleep in my bed. I was going into those weird poses and doing, mudras with my hands that I didn't know. I couldn't find any information. I was really desperate. And so I didn't want to like open up about stuff when I didn't really know how to describe it, which is obviously ridiculous now that I think about it. If you don't know what's happening, you clearly don't have the resources to get the answers, to tell people what's happening with answers. So like, why am I, all of that. My logic brain was just so running the show. And I was having a hard time going into just feeling and like identifying how I was feeling and what felt like truth and what was comfortable for me. But what I knew for sure was that what was happening was really special. There was never a point when I didn't realize that what was happening was very special. And I also wanted to protect it. I didn't want someone, whoever, like I didn't know who. I wasn't like trying to defend it from somebody in particular. I was just like, I don't want anyone to mess with this. This is a really big gift and I don't know what to do with it, but I am going to hold it tight. And because of that, I made a noted point of disappearing. I just, aside from work and aside from my daughter, I was not spending time with anybody. And while that did create some rifts in relationships, even though that was communicated as a need, I really couldn't expose myself to the media. Like I said, I couldn't do the media. I couldn't do certain types of music. I was like a newborn baby. I'm like, I need to just be in a cave and be safe in my cave. And that's it. And so that's what I did. And I collected a lot of books. I read a lot of things. I journaled a lot of things. I spent time in meditation. I spent time in yoga. I was eating only certain foods and just those certain foods. My body was transforming. Like I said, I lost like 30 pounds in 2 months, which is significant. And it wasn't like I was heavy. It was just like the parts of me that weren't me fell away. And some part of me, they say that that's when the density is leaving your body and you're left with more like what they call a light body. And so I don't know how much of that is true, like, because my body felt different, my muscle tone felt different, but I was still losing weight, but I wasn't like too thin. It was confused. It didn't make any logic sense. Let's just say I could have thrown logic out of the window then, because it was going to be a rough and bumpy road from then on as far as logic was concerned. And so the woo that I had available to me before then was significant, but it ended up becoming just an erasing of everything that I knew and an inviting of all the things that I didn't have exposure to just start over. And that is in regard to everything. That's in regard to like everything I learned in school, everything I learned in any organized religion that I was part of, anything that was a universal truth that was taught, like everybody knows, blah, blah, blah. I just threw it all out. I'm like, okay, I realize that I have been dreaming and a lot of this is not real. And so now I am going to start over and really just learn with an open mind, without, that's not true because blah, 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 blah. I learned when I was 5 there's a lot of defensiveness people go into out of protecting ideologies that they identify with as part of their identity. And I was feeling a total lack of that, a total lack of identity, a total lack of, this is true. All that I knew at that point was that something was happening to me that I couldn't control, couldn't explain, didn't know what it was. I knew it was good. I knew it was innately good because it was making me feel better and more hopeful and potentially more whole. And I didn't know what that would look like long term, but I knew I liked what was happening. I just didn't know what to do with it. And so I needed to protect it and tend to it, but erase absolutely everything so that I'd be able to receive whatever was coming my way. And so from that, I started learning that I wasn't stupid. And I don't know how many people can relate to this as a whole, but I mean, I had some abusive relationships in high school where I was called stupid frequently, and I think that people like throw that word around a lot. And I had learning disabilities that weren't identified when I was younger. And so I internalized a lot of like the things that were challenging for me in school as being an innate cognitive flaw, as opposed to like I have a different learning brain or I'm wired differently. Because there's really just, as you know, you live here, there's a cookie cutter of what is like acceptable in school for how to learn and how you regurgitate that learning and how that's appreciated or not, as the case may be. And a lot of those things are not valued, are like asking questions, disagreeing, looking at different perspectives, arguing, wanting to write things that are outside of that box of structure. And I never adhered to any structure. I just didn't. It all felt bad to me, always, innately. And so, and then with the messaging of if you're not those things, then you're stupid. And then the things I truly did struggle with, I internalized that it was a potential that I was not a bright person. Anyone around me didn't believe that later on, but I did still internalize it as a potential truth, even though I got a master's degree and I was a therapist and successful at doing it. I still was like, I'm probably just a dunce. And a lot of that was around like subjects like math and science. Of course, psychology is a science, but it was one that was, you could analyze it. It wasn't just a yes or a no. There was a lot of talk around it, and I can do well with language. And so I was like, I don't know that you can be like smart but not thrive in these areas. But it turns out that those areas are really dictated to certain types of brains and not all brains. And I would just mentally shut down in those classes because I already felt innately flawed. And so I never really got to learn some of those things with an open mind that felt safe. And so when I started experiencing dreams during this period of time of like wiping the Etch-a-Sketch clean, or you don't wipe it, you shake it, the Etch-a-Sketch, or the wiping the dry erase board clean, when you start over and you realize that everything you've learned isn't true, potentially, like just at least question it. That includes things and thoughts that I thought were true about myself, which is, you aren't good at blank. And so I started readdressing concepts. What was really convenient about that was that I was also, I've mentioned I was writing my book at the time, and I was working on a particular chapter at that moment. The chapter's called 1979 in reference to the Smashing Pumpkins song, but it's an event that happened in my life with some of my close friends where we did psychedelics, and our adventures that ensued from the psychedelics. And I did quite a lot of that in my early adult years, of which every time I did that, I saw geometry everywhere, like in the air. I saw like a grid that was perfect, like a net over everything. Every time I did psychedelics, I'm like, why is there geometry everywhere? I saw perfect geometrical figures floating in the air and moving. I saw colors. I saw all sorts of things. And I know that that's not an unusual experience to have hallucinations on psychedelics, but mine were like perfect. And so as I was writing about this experience and going back to old journals from that time, I was, because I haven't done psychedelics in decades, I was like, that's so weird, because I did see like a universal grid over everything, which I guess is kind of like how geometry works, and like some sacred shapes and things, you know. So there's like, in a New Age story, you'll see the flower of life, and I've got, you know, Metatron's cube on my arm now, but it's always been my favorite shape. And learning that there's like a lot of sacred geometry in this. There's so many shapes in this shape that all the platonic solids, everything is in the Metatron's cube. And I was like, I'm gonna look into that. And so that was one of the first things I started looking at. In school, you're taught like geometry is, you know, you're solving a problem to like maybe build something, maybe. But I was exploring, these are foundational like ways all particles work, like in physics, and how like planets are orbiting. There's like order to stuff. Honestly, it was the first thing I started going through, like going down that rabbit hole of, wait, there's order to everything. This is not just chaos. And so I started looking into sacred geometry. There's a reason it's sacred. There's order to it. Just even mitosis and how things are one that's split into two. And that's when I got hungry for knowledge. Like I got hungry. I was insatiable. Once I was awake and I realized everything I learned was potentially skewed or distorted in a way that was not serving to me to believe that I had knowledge at all, and being fed throughout my life that I couldn't understand or wasn't built right to understand. Once I threw all that away and just decided I'm going to choose to take ownership of learning about this world. And once I dug into sacred geometry, some crazy stuff happened. That's when it started coming to me. I can't wait to tell you